Hey, and welcome to our video tutorial on using loops inside triggered actions and tasks. Loops are valuable because they let you repeat actions automatically without doing the same steps over and over. They save you time, prevent mistakes, and make your automation smarter and more efficient. In today's video, we are going to look at two different use cases. My first use case being clients and dependents. If you are thinking about building an insurance application or a healthcare application, a typical workflow is a user can sign up, add a number of dependents, and in a related table, we can add all of those dependents and their information. And what the loop is going to do when you provide that number in the client's table, let's say number 5, we automatically create 5 rows inside this related table so that later on we can update the info. In my second use case, we have a table of contacts. And what I want the loop to do is to check every single record in this table. And if it's one day before the follow-up date, I want to send an email notification to every single contact in this table. Now let's take a look at my first example, clients and dependents. Let's take a look at our clients table. We have our name, email, and then the user can input number of dependents. Once we add this number via the application when we develop the form, what I want the loop to do is to take that number, let's say 5, and automatically create 5 rows inside a dependents table for that unique client ID so that we can come back later and update the info. To do that, we're going to have to go to our clients table and click on more in triggered actions. Let's create our triggered action. And what we want is to run the action on insert of data. Go down to loops and choose for each record. Snap that in place. We don't need the update. We can remove that. For each record inside the inserted table, where the data is being inserted into, which is a client's table, what we need to do first is set up 3 different unique variables. Let's go down to variables and choose add. And for my counter, which is going to add a +1 to check against the max number of dependents, I'm just going to call that variable lowercase I. Let's add one more for client ID. And last but not least, let's have max. Once you create all 3 of your variables, you're going to move them inside the triggered action. So we're going to move that inside this window. And let's begin with lowercase I, and we want that to equal to 1. So that's going to be my counter. I want the loop to keep counting until it equals or is less than the max number of dependents. For my second variable, let's include client ID so that we can reference that. Go to data, include the field, and simply just select the client ID. Let's include our third variable, which is max. Once again, go to data, click on the field, move that inside, and select number of dependents. Once you set up all 3 of the variables, go back to loops and choose while do. Let's delete that. So while I is less than or equal to the max. So you want to include your max variable here. So go down to variables, choose the second widget, move that inside, and in the dropdown, select max. And what it's doing, it's looking at that number, and as long as it's less than or equal to max number of dependents, it's going to continue to perform that loop and continue adding records in the dependents table. Under do, let's set the I to +1. So always add a +1. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I want to make sure this sticks. It's adding a +1. In other words, it's creating a new row inside the dependents table as long as it's equal or less than the max number of dependents that was provided in the client's table. And finally, we want the action to insert into the dependents table, where client ID, go back to variables, equals to the client ID. So it's going to copy over the client ID and insert the client ID inside the dependents table. That's how we associate all of the dependents back to our clients, and then the client can come back later and update all of the information. Let's go ahead and save this trigger now. Let's give it a name. Save and enable. Okay, so now that we have our trigger created, let's go back to our tables to test this out. Just try to imagine we're submitting this information via the form. I will just say John Doe. jd@client.com, and I'm just going to add number 10 for 10 dependents. As soon as you save, and let's go back to our dependents table, you will now see how John's ID is copied over 10 times, and we created 10 rows inside this table where John can come back via the application later on and update all of the dependent information. Now let's move on to the second use case, which is our table of contacts. Let's open it. You will see I have 4 entries. I have a few clients with the follow-up date set. Today is the 3rd. So once we set up this trigger inside the task, we want to be able to notify John and Raj, which is going to be the day before the follow-up date, send them both an email and let them know that your follow-up date is tomorrow. So let's go down to tasks. Let's create our task. And we will set this and configure to run daily. You can also choose at what time you want that task to run. And what we want is to go down to loops and choose for each record. Once again, no need for update. We want to select from the contacts table, which is correct. However, we need to use the select by going to data and snapping that right over here. So select from the contacts table. We really just want to name an email because we want to use that information. We definitely need the email field because we want to notify each contact, and the name if you want to personalize the email by addressing them by their name. No need for contact. We can remove this one. And then the where condition, we need to calculate 1 day before the follow-up date. So what we're going to do here is go to date, difference in days between today's date and the follow-up date. So go back to date, choose timestamp. And then over here for and, go to your data, choose field, select follow-up date, and you want that to equal to 1. Once that condition is set, you can now choose to send an email. That's what you want to perform. So you go to Actions, Send Email. You can have a from email if you've included your own inside the Caspio platform. And then the to field, you're going to go to Data, choose Field, select the email, and now you can compose and customize your own subject. For example, follow-up reminder, and then in the body of the email, you can address them by their name, or you can just say maybe this is to remind you of your follow-up appointment. And then you can sign off and say maybe sincerely, company name, whatever you want to input there at the very end for them to see. Once you're done, you're simply going to now save that. You're going to give it a name, send email reminder, enable it. And then this task will run at midnight. That's the frequency and the time that I've set up. However, if you want to test this immediately, in my table, I am using my own work email to test this out. If you run the task on demand, you should receive an email in your inbox and be able to see that notification email for every single contact that has the follow-up date tomorrow, but they're going to receive that email because the way we set up the condition is to send it 1 day before the follow-up date. So that's how you use loops inside the Caspio platform to repeat actions automatically without doing the same steps over and over. They really allow you to save time, prevent mistakes, and definitely makes your automations much more smarter and efficient. I hope you enjoyed the video. For more information about triggered actions and loops, visit our knowledge base at howto.caspio.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.